It's been a lot to process. Tim LeTourneau was a calm in the eye of a storm for many people because he seemed unflappable, though he could really show his emotional depth and breadth and patience simultaneously. He was, for a lot of people, a mentor, sometimes a collaborator, sometimes a conspirator, but he was definitely someone that it was a pleasure to work with, even when he had to tell you things you didn't want to hear. And there were a lot of things when I was working at Maxis as it became a subsidiary and then a brand and then nothing really within the EA world. There was a while that I really thought that I would be given the chance to gain the title that I was actually performing at, that was the job that I was doing. When I finished at 3DO and then did the Disney Aladdin gig that I did, and then moved on to working on The Sims, things were fairly wide open. But then Sillywood happened. EA bought what would become EA Los Angeles, which was started out as DreamWorks Interactive, and because of executive hiring and, I guess you would say, opinion about how things worked, there was an edict handed down that no one who had not had Hollywood experience could or should be given a director's title. Even though there were people around me who had that because they'd come up in video games and they had done the job there, I was told that under no circumstances would I be given a title above their dead-end artist title. That was a lot to take, and it took Tim a while to get me to believe it, and I think I didn't really believe it, which is kind of what soured me and everybody else around me on what could have been a, I guess, decent but amazingly imperfect and somewhat self-destructive career at Electronic Arts for me. I mean, I've managed to get hired and rehired at Disney 3 times. I was working at Disney before I worked at Maxis, but because it was in games, I wasn't allowed to have an art director or an animation director or any kind of title like that. The job I got right after Maxis was as an animation director on a project, and then I ended up going, first full-time job after that union job was as an animator at feature animation at Disney. So it's not that I didn't have the interest, chops, the ability. It was that it was a completely ego-driven political move. And whether or not I liked it or not, that's the way things were. Tim did his best to try and get me to shut up and try to make good and try to be friendly with folks, but I was too busy being productive, and it's not completely an excuse, but it is kind of an excuse, being an under-medicated ADHD person. I thought that my productivity and my results mattered, and this is a message for folks out there who have a creative career. What matters more is loyalty, or assumed loyalty, and making the other person above you feel like they are the king of the world and that you'll move mountains for them, whether you do or not. So, but let's talk about Tim, now that you understand what me being a black sheep in the Maxis and EA world is about. Tim was patient, he was kind, he was loyal when it was possible. For me, it wasn't possible. But we did make 2.5, 3.5 good products together. He came to me when I was working on The Sims Online and was asking me if I would take over doing the animation and maybe bringing on people to do more animation on what would become House Party. So we had an artist and several animators. One was new, who came in through friends, Sheridan Friends, and the other one was actually a generalist from SimCity. And we had this way in the expansion packs eventually of just subsuming every new hire because we were a profit center, which was kind of unfortunate for, I guess, the feelings of a lot of folks in the buildings. Like, why would they end up over there instead of like making our new, our not so new thing or another new thing better? It just so happened that because we were cranking and making a lot of content that people actually wanted, that expanded the game and gave it legs, we just happened to get newer, brighter people. I was able to hire in multiple good female animators and at least one good, crazy good male animator, not from this country, but we were able to do some amazing stuff. Tim had me come on and do these things. When Tim was involved, it was a collaboration. It wasn't a top-down thing. There were times where he felt like, and this was something I shared with him, that we needed to put something up on the big board that we used to show people what they would be working on next, what they could be working on in the future, how many weeks, how many days, etc. they had to work on it. But once we had the template done, or I had the template done in the animation of the object, it was, if the person wanted to depart from that, they could sell it to us and change what they were doing within reason to basically express themselves and to make something sing even better. There are many times where an animator would come to me and or Tim and say, could we change this way? And then we get together and have a meeting and say, that sounds better than the idea we had. So it was never a feeling of do it, it's my way or the highway, except in terms of like making everything fit together. Occasionally we had bumps in the road. There was one point when I was like kind of beside myself because someone wasn't listening to me. And Tim said, you're in charge, what do you want to do? And I need them to do what everyone else is doing. And he said, well, then tell them you're in charge and this is what needs to be done. And so I did. And it did cause tension, and it did cause hurt feelings, because basically, because of a recent training background, sort of like bump in confidence, there was a I know better kind of feeling to it. And the truth was that in most circumstances, if we were doing a piece of entertainment, that would be completely correct. But we were doing something really dumb, stupid, pantomime, that you were watching from the cheap seats, which is what The Sims was. People were playing on 286s and 386s. So there was never going to be anything that intricate. There was never going to be facial animation in a way that would prove viable. But definitely pantomime, definitely along the same style needed to happen. So Tim saying to me, make the decision, tell the person what needs to happen, it was a revelation. But he always did it from a perspective of kindness. There were times where Tim would disappear. He'd go home and he'd have dinner with his family, and they'd spend time doing stuff together and homework and stuff. And then we'd see Tim come back in, and it was like 10 or 11 p.m. And especially when it came down to things like when we were working on Hot Date, which was a different feeling from when we were working on House Party. Usually it was toward that time of the night, it was me, Corey, and Patrick, and we would be blasting Disney music and making up weird lyrics for some of the songs, and Tim would walk in and he'd sing along. And then I would break off from the sing-along and go into his office, and we would just talk about who's working well, who's doing their job well, who needs to step back a little bit because they're killing themselves. A lot of times they wouldn't listen because they were too busy thinking they were behind. We tried and failed many times to tell people they were doing enough and to move on to the next thing and come back and fix the thing later. But that usually wasn't the way other studios and other video game developer situations worked. You touched it, you made it good enough, or it was going to be done and you never get to touch it again. We were trying to work toward that, and we did it sometimes. But most of the time we got things worked out that people understood that perfect is the enemy of good. And we had been blessed with one wall in our space that was 2 large, long whiteboards, and I took over the entire thing and could plot out the entire run of the show, as it were, the run of the project, and put all the different pieces up on the board and have people see how much time they had for each thing. And if it changed, then we would shift things up and down. We made sure that people front-loaded the things they thought would be the most entertaining to work on, the most fun to do, just so they knew they'd have a good thing to work on first. And to my estimation, nobody ever really failed, especially when we were working with Tim. It was never a question of failure. It was a question of getting the thing done and moving on and making something that would make someone happy as the end result. There are many, many hours where I would sit with Tim and we'd discuss work things, but would also become about what we were working for. Tim was a guy who came up through basically the regular production path that a lot of producers did at that time, and it's kind of a shame that they don't now. Sometimes game producers are like frustrated designers or frustrated artists who just went into that side of things, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, Tim knew how video games worked because he tested them, he made test plans for them. Even in situations like what we were working on, he would be able to reverse engineer a test plan from loose design docs and things we were building on the fly, and they worked out rather well. So even up into things like The Sims Unleashed, where he was knowing that he would be transitioning off the project, he still built a test plan that worked along with what we were feeling out as we were going. It was like we were composing a piece of music, but each one of us were in charge of the instruments, that we had. The string section over here was the animators. Over there, the percussion and the, let's say the brass, basically. The brass would be, say, New Pencil, doing all of our beautiful rendered objects that they built from our templates that we gave them. And Tim was the conductor. And it wasn't a question of him trying to be in charge. It was a question of him keeping everyone together, moving at a similar pace. And it worked. It really worked. one of the drawbacks for him is that he had to run interference for a lot of different instances, where, once we had gotten over the hurdle of getting the original project and then Live and Large done, it became more about people who recognized that this might go somewhere, wanting to get their 2 cents in. I had a joke about it being like Fight Club, where the associated person, I don't know if it was Jack's boss or what have you, the main character's boss or co-worker wanting everything to be the same color of his favorite, tie, cornflower blue. Can the button on the interface be cornflower blue? That kind of thing. And but Tim could really work that angle and get people on side, or at the very least run interference to let us do what we were going to do underneath. This is a kind of producer that really knows what each person is doing, how it fits together, because he'd come up testing software, testing games, writing test plans for games, producing games in the classic sense of these things have to come together at this point in order to make this effect. And I think that was one of his points of genius there. There were many times where once we had established a rhythm, we would get visits from executives. Bing Gordon in particular, whenever he was there, would spend an hour or two, and we would be sitting on these insanely plush leather couches that almost felt like we were going to be eaten by them. And he'd be there with his golf club. Not usually a hockey stick. I think there was a hockey stick once, but mostly it was a golf club. And he'd be talking about things. And he was there to let us know that we were doing a good job. And he would have ideas, and he would float them to us. And we would, we would basically blue sky things with him. And more or less, he was there to let us know that we were doing something that would be good, because we'd done good stuff before. And especially since especially since he came on board because of his daughter's not wanting to give back his laptop after Christmas that one year, we would spitball stuff. We'd run stuff up the flagpole, or we'd throw spaghetti at the wall and see if it would stick, kind of things. I think one of the problems is that a lot of people didn't understand that. And so whenever he would come up with an idea, we'd say, okay, that too. What about this? And he would go, yeah. And then it would build. It would multiply. It would change things. It might actually extend out. That's why he was a CCO. Not necessarily because he would have the germ of the idea, but he could see where things were going. He definitely had a higher vantage point than most people. And it was really helpful, especially with him and Tim, Sean Beatty, me. Sometimes we get a marketing person to come along, but the marketing at that point was happening in a different building, in a different area code. So they would ask for stuff to be done. We have a marketing person inside named Patrick, another Patrick. But as time went on, they would have to collaborate up to the people in the other area code. Because when it comes down to it, when you make a successful product at a company like that, it's like blood in the water, and there will be sharks that come and that will be looking there to see if there's any place they can fill in a crack and change things for the better, or just ingratiate and get in. So by the time we were into Hot Date and then moving on into vacation, there definitely was a rhythm. And I think one of the most fun parts is after we finished House Party, I went back on The Sims Online and hated my life worse than before because it was almost committee driven, and it was they were looking for something to pick up at that point, and I don't believe that them having to build their own server farm and work things out, even if they had really cool people who had worked on other things that were, like Ultima, it just wasn't working. And when Tim came back to me and said, okay, you have a choice. Charles is leaving. You can stay in online and do art and animation and etc. leading there, or you can come back to expansion packs. And so before he got to the think in the what do you think, I was like, expansion packs. Because I knew for a fact that I would be working with Tim directly. There wouldn't be committees. It would be us spitballing stuff and moving back and forth between animators and artists and then sending stuff off to New Pencil. But there was not going to be that kind of every opinion of everyone in the building will be taken about this kind of thing. And it's strange that way, that everyone has their own opinion about how something should work, but unless you're actually there digging in the dirt, it's hard to tell what the tools will support and what's going on with the end users. We had a really great relationship with people because the people who were playing the game were also signing on to our bulletin board, and they were leaving comments and questions and especially suggestions about what we could do next. And some of them were exactly in line with what we'd already done, but some of them were really novel and things that we all joined in on because it was a great idea. We made our way through House Party, Hot Date, Vacation, and we really were able to give people stuff that they wanted, along with the new things that were going to expand the worlds of the Sims beyond their plots and their little neighborhoods. They were able to, leave and go other places and do other things and date and mate. And it was contingent upon us to actually navigate suggestions from people who were playing games and knew these things better than we did because they played them for dozens, if not scores, if not hundreds of hours. I mean, the same kind of stuff I was doing like a couple years ago after quarantine sort of lifted and I played like 1,300 hours of Animal Crossing New Horizons just because I got in the habit of it. It became not a chore, but it became automatic endorphin release because I was learning new things and enjoying what other people had done. And that was one of the things that we really enjoyed, the fact that we were putting out a product at the same time Nintendo was putting out a product that had similar qualities to it, that had that parasocial connection to characters that were already existing in game and ones you could make and tell your stories through. In this case, ACNH, Animal Crossing in general, was about community and about feeling like you're still a viable human being or creature in this atmosphere, whereas The Sims was more of like, how would I organize my world and how would I, move through it if there were differences with me compared to my character, compared to my Sims. Because Tim was a kind heart and a kind soul, he was very observationally adept. He could suss out a situation fairly easily. It made it easier later for him to distance himself from me as I was spiraling, because couldn't come to terms with the fact that I'd watched tons of people get something that I wasn't going to be allowed to have. And if anyone here is watching this and in any way, shape, or form caught a sharp edge off me during that time, this is my sincerest apology. I will take my hand off, and I will put my hand over my heart and say, I'm sorry. That was not the best of me. It was the best of me when it came down to working with people that I felt like I needed to protect and make things happen. But if it was coming down to it, especially on the last product I worked on for EA/Maxis, no, I was not the best person to be working with sometimes. I will cop to that. I will admit that. In fact, I've apologized to people with whom I've had the biggest beef about that kind of thing. And Tim was generally the kind of person I should have been more like. You know, he had a longer view of it. I had a view of like, I need to be accepted and I need this to be accepted about me. And though people wanted my skills and they wanted the success that would come from me wanting to be a success and wanting to make this thing have legs and be a legacy product that made a difference in that Kermit the Frog way of, make 1 million people happy. Millions of people happy. Yeah, that's a great idea. You know, that kind of thing. In many ways, I lost my way. And I didn't have a Tim around at the time. Tim had been turned loose on something else. I didn't have a Tim around to be the carbon rod in my nuclear reactor. You know, and so the kid gloves I should have had for working with other people who were usually in the past were like forming a shield above me, were gone. And so things got more and more frustrating as people got more and more opinionated about how things should be done, regardless of all the processes we'd done before. It was like, yeah, Tim definitely made you feel like you were valid. He validated people. He gave them space to do things that I feel like other leaders, other functional supervisors just didn't have the wherewithal to do. He always thought the best of people until they proved him wrong, and even then he still wouldn't write them off completely. For instance, I was just curious to see him. I hadn't seen him in almost 8-9 years because I was down living in LA for 7 years, and our paths didn't cross for a while when he was working at Zynga, and I just wanted to come have coffee with him and talk to him, and he didn't want to have me in the building with him because there were so many ex-EA and Maxis people around, and at the time I didn't know how many bridges I'd burned and how much of a black sheep I was. So Tim said, go across the street to Starbucks, I'll meet you in a few minutes because I need to do something. And really I think it was just to make sure that optically he wasn't hanging out with Eric, hanging out with Irk. And in some respects I had lived up to that Irk appellation in the negative quite a lot to a lot of people. And I will cop to that because I was very focused and not as kind or as rational as I could be at times. You know, the words didn't come sometimes and I said something that didn't sound like what I was thinking, and someone took it wrong or said that can't be done, and I would be like, and walk away. Or say, no, just do the thing. And like, they have no idea what I'm talking about. And in the past, I would have someone like Tim to say, what do you really mean? As opposed to saying, well, Eric's just being obstreperous. Like, no, Tim would actually say, what do you really mean? Like, well, if you go into the Edith, or you go into the editor, you can actually change the speed of an animation without changing out, or without making it spin out and screw up the timing of everything else in the world. And he'd be like, oh, okay, but that really never happened because I didn't have the words, nor the brain power, nor the modulated brain that I do now. And so things spun out of control. Like, I didn't know what Tim was doing and the way he was doing it as much as I do now. And in the past, I'd tried to express my gratitude to him. But as time went on, I just, different circles, different groups, craziness. You always think that you might have time in the future to meet up with someone and say, hey, thanks for this, or I'm sorry I did that. That's happened a lot in my career, and I'm glad about that. Because hindsight being 20/20, I know that I have made some people miserable because they believe that I held them to a standard that I held myself to. And sometimes I just made people miserable because I thought they were trying to make me miserable. And the truth is, nobody was being a better person, or somebody was trying to be a better person, but it just wasn't coming across properly. I mean, I will apologize to anyone who wants to bring something forward to me, because I would love to hear the real reasons. But that's something I look to Tim for an example of, like, how to function in the world. Very patient, very human, very kind. And I think, in a way, knowing that his time was limited for being able to be both ambulatory and just in general, I think that as time went on, it became more important for him to be who he was around people who would take him as he is. And I know that I miss him. I've missed him for a while because I know that I would be missing him. And you always assume there'll be more time, but then there isn't. So, Tim, I never met a person that didn't love you, that had a chance to work with you and know you. And I'm going to sit with this for a while. For all the stupid things I did that you just let run off your back like water, and you were a duck. For all the times we laughed about things that we couldn't control and fix things we could. For all the times that you brought people into the little space beneath your wings. Thank you. As I say, you are very missed. And it's going to take a while for some of us to deal with that. I love you. Good journey. Thank you.